Hello. All right, how's that? Seems great, all right?
Yep.
Okay, good. And can you hear me okay? Because I'm on a little conference speaker and can switch onto the proper microphone, but I assume we're okay. Is that all right?
Yeah, it sounds well to me. Yeah.
Good. Which case we'll go like this. Little clarification to Benny's wonderful intro. This is mainly focused on Purview. So we're going to dive too much into Synapse. Obviously, if people want a bit of a madcap, unplanned tour of Synapse, we can squeeze that in the end. That's fine. What I'm going to show you briefly is, once we've gone through the main bits of Purview, why it's built the way it's built, how it works, what all the different bits of Purview are, kind of how you get started with it. I'll show you how it integrates into Synapse Analytics. So they've kind of just plumbed it in so it can be this kind of data discovery tool that's baked into the tools that you're using. If you also want a whirlwind tour of Synapse, we can make that happen. That's fine. But yeah, cool. Hello. It's nice to be here again. I obviously love coming over and chatting to you guys. I'm just sad I'm not there in person, so I've got to deal with cans of beer, not, you know, nice, fresh Belgian beer, but it's fine. Ah, dear. Cool. Okay, so talking Purview, many things to go through. And as Benny said, it is new. It's still in preview. I guess like big warning signs everywhere. This is a preview tool. It is not generally available yet. It still has one or two little quirks, as with everything that is in preview, and there's still things we don't know. So I am all up for you throwing all of your gnarly, weird, and wonderful questions at me, but I might just have to go, because there's just bits that we do not know yet. Okay, cool. So cracking on. Hello, I'm Simon. Run a company called Advancing Analytics, which is a consultancy in the UK. We do all things like data lakes and advanced analytics, hence the name, bits of data science, data engineering. Generally, I spend most of my life playing around with Spark and Databricks and all things like that. But many things that we do. And one of the biggest questions that we always have is, what do we do for data governance? If you're building a lake and you've got all these different bits of data sources going everywhere, how do I find the data that I'm looking for? So actually, with this whole plowing ahead with the modern data warehouse style of things, data governance is a huge piece that's been missing for a while. We're a Microsoft partner. I spend lots of time talking to Microsoft. I spend lots of time talking to Databricks, Microsoft MVP, blah, 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 intro stuff. Yes, hi, all good. So let's have a talk about data governance. Because this is the tricky bit. Anytime anyone tries to start a conversation about data governance, it's really hard, because pretty much everyone has a slightly different opinion on what data governance is. And depending on which of your different aspects you're coming and where your background is, you've probably got a different opinion about what data governance actually means. Yeah, I'll go a little bit into Apache Atlas. I'll talk about how it's plumbed into Purview, but spoilers, we'll get there. Don't worry, early questions. I'm still introducing. Okay, some context about what we're talking about. So if we say data governance, and you say that to an information security person, they're going to be talking GDPR and PII. They're going to be saying, have you stored data correctly? They're going to be thinking, are we going to get sued for how we've stored the data? Are we going to have a data breach? Am I going to have to go to jail because I've not handled people's data properly? It's all about data sensitivity and security. Whereas if you talk to people who own the data, the person who is the product owner for the system that's producing it, well, they're worried about duplication and making sure that, you know, kind of they follow the right standards. They're worried about making sure people interpret the data properly. And that's like a world of difference from what you're actually expecting from governance. And it goes on and on. Data stewards, they tend to care about quality metrics. What percentage of that field is actually filled in? How many things are actually within the threshold that I expect for that? What kind of distribution of values do I have in that particular table? And all three of them will say what they're doing is data governance, despite the fact they are very different requirements, different features, different ways of working. It goes on. Data engineers, hello, tend to worry about processing. How do I handle that? Do I need to track history on it? How long until I archive it? What's the lineage of this? If I finish processing this, what other activities do I need to do to actually then progress that? Now, sure, you can say that's just data development, but it's governance, right? It's rules and regulations. It's how do I handle certain bits of data? What calculation do I apply to this in order to get that figure? There's tons and tons that people think is data governance. And then we've got the people actually using the data, people who realize value, people who get hold of that data and go, hey, look, we can make a decision, actually do something based on it. And they're worried about, how do I find the right data? How do I, if I type in customer, how do I find the right customer table or customer dimension or customer CSV file that I can actually go about and do my job with? And that has historically been the problem with people putting out data governance tools, in that they either have way too narrow a scope and they go, this is our big data governance tool, and it's focused on one single persona. Or they go the other way around and they try and be jack of all trades and master of none, and essentially everyone thinks it's rubbish and no one can use it. And historically, that's kind of where we are. People tend to go one way or the other because they've got this gigantic mash of different user requirements to try and satisfy. So data governance, in a nutshell, is hard. And I think most people know that. Most people do not have a really mature, absolute rock star data governance team in their companies. They might have a data strategy. They might have grand plans to get there and some stuff that they're kind of doing manually. You might have bought an incredibly expensive off-the-shelf tool and be doing some of it really well. But it's very rare to hit all those boxes properly. And there is like the little wild card at the bottom is master data management, which people go, is that a part of it? Is it not? And that's kind of being forgotten by most tools these days. So it's like another extra thing in the background. So that's kind of like, that's what we'd like. I would like something off the shelf that does all of that, please. And that's a challenge. So we're trying to solve these things. So if your users are asking questions such as, how do I access my data? What would happen if I changed this? What would break downstream? Where do I go to find this out? Who should I trust? What should I do with this, this, and this? All these different things are data governance questions. Whether or not they're currently labeled in your organization as that's an actual data governance problem, it comes under that giant umbrella, that big nebulous mass of things that we call data governance. So what happened in the past? So you might go, some of this sounds familiar. Haven't we already had something in Azure that can do this? And you may have come across our faithful old friend, Azure Data Catalogue. Now, that was previously available. Still currently, I think you can still do it in Azure. But essentially, it was this big thing. It was introduced. Everyone was like, yeah, great, we've got a data governance tool. And expectations were set as that giant nebulous mass. And it was very, very neatly targeted. It was very good, actually very, very good with relational data. It was great for hooking up to a SQL server and doing some data profiling and saying, this is what's inside that SQL server. Here's your different tables you've got. Data discovery was all right. People could go in there and query it and get a list of the different data sets, the different tables in those SQL servers that contained those terms. So for some of those boxes, it was actually had little ticks saying, yes, it could do that job. But then there's a whole nebulous mass of other stuff that it didn't do. So data and Azure Data Catalog, it kind of took off with a bang. Loads of people tried it, and then loads of people went, doesn't quite do everything I need to. And then there hasn't really been any investment that we've seen. Now, apologies to the Microsoft teams, there's been a ton of investment. We've not seen it. Not a lot has changed in the Azure Data Catalog world for quite a while. So, good at some areas. Attaching docs, saying, hey, look, here's a term. This term describes what's doing in this measure. Here's the documentation that's behind it. Great. Being able to do that and actually tie in a data dictionary, essentially, to the rest of your data documentation, fantastic. Being business glossary, being able to do some elements of data discovery. So all these things actually did okay in the quite restricted sphere that it worked in for relational sources. So as soon as you then put it on top of a lake, on top of a huge mass of other data sets, as soon as you went, you know what, I've actually got a real world data estate rather than a very nicely, neatly contained set of SQL servers, it kind of fell down. It wasn't very good at scanning this whole mass of other stuff. Also wasn't very good at like doing things like data access, saying, do you have access to see that or not? Does this data flow into this data, this flow into this data? Didn't really do. And it had an API, but the API was rubbish, honestly. You can kind of like force your way into it. You can get some stuff to work. Eventually they fixed some parts of it, but it's very hard to hook in programmatically. So in terms of the way people are working in the modern world, people are actually, they want to finish a job and then update their damn data dictionary to say it's been done. They want to plug in things automatically. You want to land data and actually have it automatically appear in your data dictionary and not have to manually do all this stuff. So it's hard. So data catalog kind of didn't really take off in the way that they wanted it to. And for a long time, we've been hearing this idea of like, oh, it can be done better. And this is a real simplistic look at what I need a data catalog to do. If I'm building a data governance tool, that's like the normal thing that I build for a lot of client problems. The normal kind of modern data lake house, modern data warehouse, call it what you will, depending on your patterns, process. So I'm bringing some data into my system. I'm landing it in some kind of temporary blob storage. I'm picking up by a data factory. So I've got some data factory jobs that's moving data around. I'm picking data up and transforming it via some metadata-driven programmatic distributed compute engine, Databricks, Synapse Spark pools, whatever you're using to do your kind of dynamic ad hoc data crunching and processing stuff. And then putting it into some kind of serving layer. So I've got another placeholder where people can access it and query it and work on that data. And that'll have a load of logical constructs and views and store procs and various things in there. And then I'm pushing it to reporting services, to Power BI, to Tableau, to any other reporting tool. And that is a very linear, if my catalog can do that end to end, I'm quite happy. But that is the nicest story. That is the easy use case we needed to follow. Whereas in actual fact, if you've got one of those implemented, if you have this nice, good, solid, modern data platform in it, you've probably also got a mass of other Power BI data sets and some self-service stuff and some ones that people have created and haven't maybe done on top of their own data. You've got a load of other SQL servers for other applications, other use cases, your OLTP stuff. You've got a load of Cosmos DBs and other things. Someone built it for a POC. Someone's maybe got a website that's running entirely on Cosmos. You've got a load of legacy on-prem stuff. You've probably got some Power Platform, bit of SharePoint, bit of other things going on, bit of Power Automate moving data around. You've probably got Access knocking around your business somewhere. Essentially, there is lots of different data in lots of different formats. Not Excel, Access, is that good enough? Spread around all over the place. And it's hard. And that was one of the real challenges with data catalog, right? Because it was really good in this known, quite blinkered view of the world. And if a data governance solution can't just say, here's all of my data and allow me to map my data estate, then it's not really great. So one of the big challenges, one of the big hardest things to do is this breadth of different data sources to understand where the data currently is, not just the rainbows and unicorns view of this is where we'd like our data to all live in a single data platform. Because if you've got that, you probably don't need a data governance solution as much. It's a very different, your horse has left the stables kind of thing. Okay, so that brings us on to Purview, this new thing, Azure Purview. And essentially, it's kind of data catalog Gen 2. They talked about it for a long time as, it's the next generation of data catalog. But actually, it's a lot more. It's a lot of other stuff. But it's doing some similar ideas. When you first look at it, it can be easy to think, oh yeah, it's the same thing, they just improved it a little bit. And it has a few different bits here. We'll go into some of these different areas. The whole idea being, it's a little bit like going to your favorite search engine, Bing. Yeah, searching for your data catalogs assets and kind of working through and finding things. It's meant to be that one-stop, easy landing page to go and query stuff. Where we've done something about customers. Where have we got data that uses our, I don't know, earnings before interest and tax metric? Yeah, okay, we can go there. It's in 5 different data sets. Let's go and have a look at that and see if one's useful. It's meant to be that nice landing center for all that kind of stuff. But then there's a load of stuff that goes on in the other areas for doing registering new areas, for doing your curation of data, for doing your tracking lineage. There's lots of different bits and pieces inside it. Okay, so it has this concept of this ideas of these different kind of areas of data. And it's kind of trying to say you're a big enterprise. You've got multiple different divisions inside your company. You've got different data, essentially segments of your data estate. So in this case, what we've got, one side, it's got a SQL Server, it's got a Cosmos, it's got another Azure SQL DB. Other side, they've got a couple of SQL servers in the Synapse. The way they've tried to look at mapping this is to allow you to register these different data sources, but assign them to a collection. So it's got this whole concept of mapping different data sources into these little realms of responsibility. So each person can manage the data sources that are in their purview. Yeah. So that's called a collection. So when we look at sources, we'll see these collections, which are buckets of sources, and then our sources underneath that map into it. And you can have collections mapping into collections, mapping into collections, and you can have a quite complex, essentially kind of giant hierarchy of all the different data that goes into your estate. It's built in a very flexible way, so you can go and explore quite complex organizational structures. So we'll get into that. And then when you've got a source, and you do a thing called a scan, underneath that is a load of assets. Now, an asset is just a super flexible, it's a thing. And a thing can be many, many, many different things. It's a SQL Server table. It's a column inside a table. It's a schema inside a database. It's a database. It's a folder in a data lake. It's just, there is a thing, an entity that lives inside this data source. And so you get this whole hierarchy of things. If you sit inside that database, there's several schemas. Inside that schemas, there are tables. Inside a table, there are columns. And these are all mapped out as this hierarchy of assets. So this thing called a scan is very, very purview that goes off and it just maps all that out. It scrapes all the metadata. It runs a ton of classifications, which we'll get into. So when you give an asset, you have a load of attributes that are automatically populated. So it'll go in and give you, oh, I've recognized this is a table. Here's some stats about the table. Here's how many partitions it has. This is kind of some overall general information about that particular entity. And then actually, as I was saying, it builds into a hierarchy. And a lot of that is done for you. So you're not manually creating these things and manually tagging them. You're adding a source, saying, please scan it, hitting go, and then waiting for this whole collection of assets to be scraped, categorized, collected, and then registered into Purview. So there's a load of stuff. So you can then go and explore it. Why does it work this way? Mentioned in the questions, because it is based on Apache Atlas. So it's the Apache Atlas data map and the data cataloging and a lot of the data structures with a load of these automation APIs and scans and essentially registry things baked on top of it. So Apache Atlas is the open source. It's kind of fairly well adopted. It's almost the open source standard for doing data cataloging now. But actually, you need a few components to stand it up. If you go and look at the documentation for Apache Atlas, you need to have kind of the thing for this kind of graph database, essentially, this collection of nodes and edges that describe your entire data estate. You need somewhere for that to live. And you need a few other things for the front page and the landing page. So you need to kind of deploy essentially a whole solution. Purview's been made as a wrapper around all of that with a load of value add stuff on top to do things like the categorizations, to apply a load of Microsoft's machine learning to say, well, that looks like sensitive data. That looks like someone's bank account to be able to do data recognition. So they've kind of taken that generic structure and built a load of stuff around it. And that's why some things it feels a little bit weird. Some things you're looking at and going, well, why is that going to that, going to that, going to that? And it's because it's built as a graph database. It's because it's built on top of this pre-existing open source standard called Apache Atlas. So be aware that is there. One of the benefits of it is that actually because they've implemented this fairly mature open source standard, it's got the API. So it means there is a whole programmability interface already exposed. So if something isn't built into Purview yet, you can just call the API and build manual objects and create it, and extend it, and do lots and lots of cool stuff. And we might have a look at some of that. Depends on time. We'll see. So where do we start? One or two things to be aware of. If you go and try and create a Purview account currently, there are things called resource providers in your subscription that you need to enable first. So you need to make sure your subscription is enabled for Purview, Event Hub, and storage. If those aren't ticked, if they're not registered, then you'll get a weird, quite odd error. So just make sure you've got those set up, and then you can go ahead and create it like anything else. And one thing we'll mention quickly is you've got a thing called credentials. So Purview itself has a managed service identity. So you can authenticate as Purview and go and talk to various things if you've given Purview access to stuff. Or you can log a load of things saying, well, this is my SQL credentials to access that database. This is my service principal to access that particular lake. So you might need to set up a load of those things in advance if you're not going to give the Purview managed identity access to a load of stuff. kind of up to you about how you're going to do your security and how much privilege you want to give Purview to go and talk to a load of stuff. Okay, the final thing on credentials, which I love, is that everything must be key vault backed. So unlike things like if you're using Data Factory, these are very similar ideas. So you have a linked service and you put some credentials in, you plug it all in, and you have a choice going, I want this to be key vault backed, in which case go and get the password from my credential store, simply my password manager for Azure. And that means if someone changes the password every 30 days, I don't have to go and redeploy all my code. It can just go and get the current value. But in Data Factory, you have a switch. You can choose it to be key vault or not. Purview, no, everything has to be key vault. I was like applauding when I first saw it. I was like, yes. Okay, let's go and have a bit of a look at some stuff. Okay, so over here, this is Purview. Let me zoom in a little. And like a lot of the fairly modern Azure elements, it's got its own workspace. So if you're using Data Factory or Databricks or Synapse or any of those ones, you kind of deploy the thing in your Azure bottle, in your subscription. When you go into it, it has its own open Purview Studio. So it opens a whole separate browser. So whenever you're interacting with Purview, it's always through this Purview workspace. So you can see we've got this kind of search page landing. So we can see the things I've recently accessed down the bottom. You can see, go into the search catalog and say, well, what have I dealt with? Orders, do I have anything to do with orders? No results. Something. So you can see anything that matches that. You can do keyword searches. What? No, I don't want one in a database, just want it on assets. It has an asset browser. And it's okay. For me, this is one of the downsides of Purview in that the asset browser is very literal. And it requires people to know, if I'm a business user coming in here going, right, just where do I go to query this data? And I'm suddenly presented with every folder and every CSV and every file and every database. It can be quite overwhelming, just the sheer amount of stuff. But from a techie point of view, you just get access to everything. You can explore all the various different bits. I only want to go from that lake. And I only want to make sure it's a file that I'm looking at. I can know not a file, a resource set, that's a collection of files for Sparky stuff. And then I can get to my data. So some good parts, some bad parts, maybe a little bit techie for some kind of not particularly data savvy business users. But for any data analyst, for anyone doing some data modeling, really quite advanced, you can get to a lot of stuff. So there's loads of good things in there. In terms of an asset, so this is a particular thing called a resource set. So a resource set is when it has realized that in a particular lake, I've got not just one file, but I've got a whole set of files. And it's actually gone down, it's been quite smart. It's realized in my folder structure, I've got year equals, month equals, day equals, and it's realized that that's actually partitioning. So it's actually recognized that, it's plumbed it in, it's built that into the stuff. It's realized the name of the thing, and it didn't used to do this. It used to call everything just Spark data. And you're like, well, what is that? What does that mean? But they've actually made it so it can actually understand Spark data structures now, which is great. Again, that downside of old school Azure data catalog, the fact that it speaks the same language as us when we're actually looking at data lake, awesome. You can see on the side the hierarchy it's in. So I know that this is a particular resource set, but it lives inside a data lake, which lives inside a storage, which lives inside a main storage account. So you kind of got all these different concepts, all these different assets that are built on one another that it just goes off and automatically gives to us. So we've got this kind of quite rich browser, and we'll come back to this in a second. So go back to our catalog. We've got this whole thing on the side, which is how we explore the different areas. And the data source bit is what I want to show you first. Because remember, we're talking about that idea of collections. So I've got a load of data sources, and I can say, well, these data sources belong in that collection. That person is responsible for those ones. This other subsidiary in my business, that's over there. And we can kind of map these different collections of data sources. So on the sources, I've got this whole idea, and you can see, oh, I've got a whole map of these different data sources. And these are just, there's a SQL Server I've registered. There's a Lake I've registered, a SQL DB I've registered, a Synapse workspace I've registered. And they're just data sources, linked services if you use the Data Factory parlance, just a connection to a particular data source. But I can map it into this collection. So I can say, well, inside this one, I want to register a new data source, and I get a whole load of different data sources I can register. And this is one of the main areas they're focusing on expanding that breadth. So since the preview was released, we've like doubled, tripled the number of different data sources that we've got in here, and there's more and more being added in. So it's really good to see. And I guess the other thing to note is that it's not just Azure, because again, going back to that point of if your data governance solution only maps part of your data estate, it's not that useful. So the fact that we can go and map an AWS account, we can go and map Amazon S3 buckets, we can map SAP and SAP HANA, we can do various different things to go and bring in things outside of the Azure estate and actually include that in our cataloging, which is great. And again, they're increasing it. From the original videos that they did, like marketing going, blah, blah, we've released Purview. There's loads more data sources in that particular video they made out. So I was rubbing my hands going, oh, we're going to get all of that good stuff. So lots and lots of things coming there. Lots of they appear to be working on according to marketing. So that is great. Then if you want to go and register something, pick a type. You can do an Azure one. Azure is a little bit weird because it'll go and do multiple things. So I can say, well, actually, inside this subscription, inside a particular resource group, go and find all the things. And it's going off and it's added in my particular resource group. So whether that's a database, a data file, you just add a collection in there. And then when you want to work with it, you've got this scan button. That's I want you to again go and run a job, look through all the metadata, run all the different classifiers to go and understand what's inside that data source I've just registered. So in this case, it's realized I've got a few different things. I've got some blob storage, I've got some data lakes, and it's just saying which of these do you want to include in this generic, big, heavy scan. So because this is an Azure style one, this is going to go and do lots of different scans. We step onto one that's slightly easier. Let's just dive into a basic database one. I think that one probably makes sense. Teach me ADF. Sure, let's see if it works. Okay, so I've got an AdventureWorks database, telling it which credential to use. So is it using a generic, the managed service identity, or is it using one of my registered SQL credentials? So I can have it go in and figure out how to go and talk to them. I can't remember what I've given access here. Well, we'll see. Might tell me no. Oh, it actually worked. Surprised. So it's gone in. It said, here's all the tables that are in that source. Which of them do you want to scan? So am I scanning everything that's in there? Do I just want to do an update on one of the particular things? I can choose what the kind of the breadth of this scan that I'm running and say, yeah, that's okay, that's fine. Then it says, what kind of scan do you want to run? So baked into it, each different data source will have a particular scan that's in there by default. Now I've created a new one. So we can say, well, actually, I don't want to run the baked in scan, which runs a certain set of rules. I want to do my own scan, give it a random name. And then it'll give me a list of things. What am I looking for? I mean, there's no financial data. I don't want to scan it for financial stuff. Oh, and I definitely don't want to do those ones because it's only European data. You can get rid of a lot of that stuff. And you can kind of just fine tune all of these different rules that are around to discover the data. So these are all the things that are going to try and look at a bit of data, look at a particular column on a table and try and go, is that a bank account? Is that someone's postcode? Is that, oh no, that's someone's name. I need to treat that under GDPR stands. And this whole thing is deciding which rules need to run. So if I've written a load of custom rules, if I've extended this, if I just wanted to be really fast and cheap, I can turn off a load of stuff and turn on some other stuff. So you can really fine tune what it looks for when it goes and runs these scans. Not gonna, so we're just gonna quickly dive back in. I'll choose the standard one for now. Don't want everything. Standards. When do you want to run it? So you can have it running, the minimum you can do is once a week. I can't have this running more than once a week. And that kind of gives you a bit of a message about, I guess, how they expect you to run it. It's not some like the immediate data governance that the moment you land some data in the lake, it's going to slap you on the back of the hand and say no. It's a kind of backwards looking, oh, this week we've had these things, there's a risk, we should look after it. It's very kind of a backwards looking idea, digging in and figuring out something that's gone wrong. So it's looking for general overview reporting rather than immediate preventative governance. Okay, so we say we want to do a one-off scan. Go ahead, save and run, and that's going to go off, go through everything that's in there, and then just pull that out. So you can see the different scans are there. You can see I've got a run that's a scan that is currently running. I can go in the ones that completed and see what it ran, what it saw. It found 14 tables in there, all of that kind of stuff. So it's by that process of registering a data source with Purview, assigning it to a particular collection, designing the scans that I want in there and how often they need to run. And then those scans are the things that once that scan has finished, that will be the thing that goes in and essentially updates all of this. So anytime I scan something, it will go in, update my particular asset that I've registered, build all this hierarchy out, allow me to go and explore everything that's in there, and going down to the level of things like schema. So even for a CSV, it's gone in and it's ran that kind of classification to work out what are all the structures in here, what are the data types, and it's got these things for classifications. And we'll go into classifications in a second. Okay, so that's a little bit about Purview itself, how we get sources in there. We'll touch on credentials when we get to the management bit later, and kind of exploring assets and what's sitting in there. See a few questions. Yeah, no, exactly. Kind of to Anna's question, saying this seems fairly techy. How kind of focus is it for business users? And absolutely, I agree. I mean, in my opinion, they've put a lot of features in there to make it feel like it's meant to be a data discovery tool. But my immediate opinion is it's a little bit techy for straightforward business users. It's an incredibly powerful thing for data analysts, for people who are a little bit data savvy. You don't have to be a developer to go and dig around in here, but you kind of need to understand the difference between a file in a lake and a table in a database. You kind of need to have that level of, if you were in Power BI and setting up, kind of data store connections, this will be fine for you. If you're expecting someone to have already set that up and you just want to know which of my various data models do I use, this might feel a little bit techy. So yeah, definitely, I think there's definitely more work they need to do on that front end nicety to make it really nice for the business users. But a lot of what was missing from Data Catalog Gen 1 was all the tech back-end foundation stuff. So I'm kind of happy if they build it on a real technical foundation and then they put the niceties and they make it more accessible rather than backwards, which didn't work in the last one. So hopefully they're going to go in the right direction. But I agree, it's fairly tricky to get hold of for business users. Are these scans based on the data or attribute name? We will get to that. I'll show you a bit about classifications in a second. First, I want to talk about what a classification is, which is a perfect segue, so thank you.
Simon, there's one person that has their hand raised as well, so I think they have a question.
Okay, cool. Yeah, shoot.
Hi, sorry that's I was about to type. I didn't. I forgot I could type. Just a question. I just curious. The integration or with the on-premises data, it looks very familiar with ADF.
Yeah.
I thought, yeah, all right. So you felt the same too. Therefore, is it assumption is a good assumption to think that it uses integration runtime to connect to on-prem or not?
Oh, spoilers.
Sorry.
So yeah, you can add an integration runtime. You can plop something in your on-prem network and have that go and do it. Honestly, I've not actually tried doing this yet, but the whole idea, exactly like ADF, is that you can extend it with integration runtimes in exactly the same way. There's lots of similarities between how you think about getting Data Factory to connect to things to how they build Purview to connect to things. So yeah, absolutely. If you want to extend it to on-prem, self-hosted integration runtime is the way you go.
Thank you.
Cool. And they still haven't changed the name. I hate self-hosted integration runtime because I can't type SHIR without typing other things. Okay, so asset tagging. We've got a bit of data. So this thing that's actually living on this credit card. So we've got two different things it could be. Is it just generically, it's a person's name? So Alex Livingston, that's a person, therefore I need to treat it in such a way. There's certain regulations around how I treat a bit of information that is a person's name. That's very much the what is it? What kind of data is it? It is a person's name. But then in the context of the business, that's the person's billing name. So I need to use it for certain things. If I'm going to contact them about the order and it's to do with the payment not going through, that's the person I should get hold of. If I need to know who I talk to deal with this thing, I've got a certain expert if it's the customer's billing name. Whereas actually person's name, I might use all over the place. Person's name could be the person who sold it. It could be the actual recipient of delivery. It could be the person in shipping who's responsible for packaging it up. So you've got these two different ideas. There's what type of data is it? And what does it mean in context of my business? And how should I work with it? How should I interpret it? So get these two different things in your head. So you got one, what is it? One, what does it mean to me? So that's kind of the two different concepts that we've got inside Purview. You've got classifications and you've got glossary items. And that's kind of how I think of it. Classifications are identified by scans. So that thing that we saw when we run that scan and it goes and looks for different types of bank account, different types of personal identification numbers, people's names, that's all a classification. That's saying, what is that object? That is a type of data. And that's all automated using a load of scans. We can set up our own ones, and I'll show you a little bit what that looks like. And it uses a whole wealth of existing things. So where you've got in Azure SQL DB currently, in Synapse, it can do some data classification. Let's say, hey, look, you've got 10 different bank accounts in different columns. And it does that via a mix of stuff. Bit of it is regex, bit of it is column names, bit of it is running ML and actually doing some AI to work out kind of what that data set actually is. So there's a whole big bundle of these different classification rules to work out what that data is. But it can't tell you what it means to you. So glossaries is the other side. Glossary is us applying meaning to it, going, that is someone's bank account, but it's the person who paid for it. We use it in this way. So glossary is business rules. It's commonly referred to as the difference between a data dictionary and a business KPI glossary. Essentially, you've got this glossary terms, and that might be a calculation. It might be profit, and we calculate profit by this divided by this plus this minus this, whatever that happens to be. So it could just be calculation rules. It could just be, yeah, essentially context. This means this, for this, don't use it for this. Talk to this guy if you need some more information on it. Here's some more documentation for it. So be aware of those two. Main thing, classifications are automated. Glossary is manual. Someone has to go in and say, this is that glossary term. It can't recognize those glossary terms for you. Okay, so you get that kind of view. So against something, it can have both classifications and glossary terms. You can have multiple against a given object, and you can have a hierarchy. So glossary terms, it can be, well, it's this, which belongs to this superset of different terms, and you can map it out, because again, everything's a graph. So you can kind of map things in quite nicely. So when it does that schema scanning, it'll go and build out this, and it will automatically tag them for you. And you can go in and go, no, that's not an email address. Yeah, it's got an @ on it. It doesn't make it an email address. You can override it, you can undo it, you can change them around with a little warning. If you do change them, it does stop it from them updating it in future scans. And that reduces a lot of value for me. But we'll take a little look at what that means. So back over here, if we dive into a known asset, I'm going to grab one of the ones we know about. I'm going to grab a customer, see what that's got in terms of classification. There we go, so that's the same one. So we can see customer, the first name, last name, it's realized that as a person's name field. Now, if you just looked at first name on its own, it's unlikely just reading the data, you'd go, well, that's a name. But it's done a mixture of looking at the data types, looking at what's in there, looking at the column name. This guy one includes names, probably someone's name, nothing particularly crazy there. Phone numbers, it's realized what they are. Essentially runs a load of rules. Some of them are super simplistic, some of them are fairly advanced. Depends on what the rule that we're looking at is. But we can go in and say, well, actually, I disagree with this. Let's edit this. So we can see the classifications that are currently in there. We can go, well, no, it's not a person's name. That's something else. And we can override it, we can update it, we can switch it around. Same with glossary terms. So I've got a couple of glossary terms I've got in there. So classifications, they're all defined at the big automated level. Glossary terms I do through the glossary. I have to manage my own ones. So I can go in and say, well, it's actually my customer's name. So these two are both my customer's name. So that's putting it in context. It's realized it's a name. I'm telling it what kind of name it is. It's a customer's name, not an employee's name, not a salesperson's name, not anything else like that. And I can add further details, descriptions. I can go and edit to my heart's content. But we've got this little warning at the top. Making manual updates to the asset will prevent future scans. So if I go and untick a classification and add some glossary items, the next time my automated scan runs, if it's got extra fields, if that item has changed, it won't get updated because I've manually amended it. And that it's not great. It's a bit of a letdown, honestly, but I'm hoping that's something they'll fix once it moves out of preview and I'll kind of evolve. But for now, it is a limitation. Be aware of that limitation. If you do any manual data curation, that stops the automated scanning working. Okay, so we step out there for now. I'm just going to go back and show you the glossary. So the glossary is the other area that we've got in here, and that allows us to create these new terms. So I can say, well, a new glossary term, and I can do a default template, and essentially that's just a form that describes this glossary item. Or I can say, well, there's a new template, and I just manually design all of the different attributes. So I can say there's a term which is just a normal data quality term. I can say there's a term which is a KPI term, and that has a special calculations field, the DAX measure, the whatever it is. I can decide whatever fields I want someone to have to fill in whenever they register a new glossary term. I can design whatever I want in here. So you've got quite a detailed system for actually allowing people to build out this glossary. So I step into one that already exists. I've got profit. So you can see there's a few things in here. So I can see what assets have been tagged as profit. See what updated it. I can go and say, who are the experts? Who should I go and speak to? So I can say, well, actually, the person who knows the most about this is, am I in here? Oh, there's no expert called Simon. I can go and tag various different people in here. So if someone goes, right, okay, that term's a profit. What does profit mean? And they get the description. They're like, no, I need to get more details. They can step over, find the expert, and go and find the related person. So loads and loads of detail and depth you can get to in here in this whole asset building thing, which is good. It's nice, lots of stuff in here. If we go back to the overview, we can see those related things. Whoops. So I can step in and say, well, what assets have been tagged as profit? And I've immediately got that. There is one thing where we've used profit. It was a SQL table. I can see which table it is. There we go. I've tagged first name as a routing number and profit. It's obviously wrong. But I can then go and open that in Power BI. I can start working with it. So that there's some niceties to try and get that data analyst piece of going. Right, I need to understand where profit's used. Give me my list of all the places that have profit. Dig into that one. Look at the schema. Open it in Power BI, ready to work. That story is quite nice. That story actually sort of links in quite nicely together. On the other side, on the classifications, I wanted to show you this briefly. So in our management area, so we've got a whole management center where we can do all the config bits. And we've got two things. We've got classifications and rules. So the classifications is just my flat list of all the different classifications it might assign to a bit of data. And I can customize it. I can add in new ones. I can make up my data factory execution ID, which isn't sensitive data, but I decide to put it in there. And I can have a description. I can do all that kind of stuff in there. But then the real smart bit is I can assign a rule to it. So I can say, well, I want a new rule, which is how I recognize my ADF execution ID. And I've got a few things in here. So I want to do ADF execution. How do we do this? Should it be a regular expression, or should it be a dictionary of data to go and have a look and say, is it in this structure? Why is not okay? And then if we step into regs expression, we can do two things. You guys can only see one of those two things. I'm going to zoom that up. So we can do a data pattern. So we can say if you sample the data and this percentage of the data matches this pattern, then it's that classification. Or we can do a column pattern, saying if the column name is like this. So it's kind of an either or. So we can do both deep data sampling. We can say it has to be every single thing in here has to match this pattern, otherwise it's not there. Or we can go and just say, you know what, if the column name says ADF execution, it's probably the ADF execution ID. We can just rely on that. And it's up to us. So you can actually just extend this with a whole load of custom regex rules and column name rules to go and really explore how these classifications work. And I was really impressed when I dug into that. There's actually a lot of depth and scope for what you can use that for. So scans, easily extensible to actually do what kind of data is it in classifications. It just makes me sad that it doesn't grow to glossaries. If I override it and I attach my own glossary items, that means they no longer get updated by scans for now. Hoping they'll change it, but we'll see. Okay, right, lineage. So one of those other elements, when we were talking at the start about that whole different personas, one of the personas was the data engineer. And the person saying, hey, I want to build this into a engineered workflow. I want to have metadata automatically pushed to Purview, pulled from Purview, and I want to understand where data came from. And where data came from has always been a tricky thing. So the idea of lineage it's great that it's now baked into Purview. So there's a few things that we can do in here. I've got some questions in the chat. Are people looking it up? So something about payments. So people asking if this uses Gremlin or Cosmos or that kind of stuff, who sets it up and who pays for it. If you're going Atlas, which that conversation might be about Atlas, then yeah, your resource provider, you pay for it through your Azure subscription. Purview isn't all in one. So despite the fact it's using a graph database behind the scenes, it's got all these different data map engine, the scanning engine, all these different bits. It all gets baked into one set of Purview costs. So this is a big wrapper, and everything gets treated as the same thing. And who pays for it? It depends who pays for your Azure subscription. Like anything in Azure, you can assign it to a certain resource group. You can have different Purview accounts and with different people paying for it, but that kind of belies the point of having a data governance tool that maps your entire data estate. But yeah, it's a platform as a service tool. So all of that is baked into a single thing. Okay, so lineage. So lineage is when we're trying to say, well, I created this data set by sucking it from another data set. I took these bits of data and I transformed it. I added some calculations, I did a lot of stuff, and I made this new data set. And having that lineage of knowing where did I get from to create this data is incredibly useful. So it's essentially saying, well, I had this SQL table of customer, and I brought it down into a lake, and I landed it as this customer CSV, and I want to have that lineage tracked. So saying it was a data factory copy job that picked it up, pulled it across, and it ran it this time, and this is the parameters, and this is how it worked. And that is incredibly important to actually being able to track it. So that's the concept of lineage. And they had this picture in the initial marketing. I was like, oh my God, that looks amazing. Of just being able to say, here's all my sources. And they went in from that ETL job. And then there's some more logic applied. Then it got sucked into a Power BI data model. And then they were put into some Power BI reports. And then it went to a Power BI dashboard. And that end to end, if someone coming into this and saying, hey, I'm just going to change that customers table, what's that going to affect? And being able to pull out a whole map of the impact analysis is great. Sadly, it's not quite there yet. It doesn't quite do all of that. It does parts and parcel of those. We'll have a quick look at it. Oh, okay. So let's go and have a look. One of the main bits it does currently is Data Factory. So still in our management area, I can do this. I can set up an external connection to a Data Factory. You can see I've already done one. And I can say, I want to create a new connection, pick a Data Factory, pick one, and then that will then connect it and go and scrape all of its logs. So it essentially uses the operational logs. Whenever I run a process, and if I run Data Factory monitoring, I see that's gone and done a thing, that then gets created as our lineage. And that is a real important point for me. Because when I first looked at this, and they were like, hey, we can do lineage based on Data Factory. I was like, if it expects me to have hard-coded data copies saying this schema maps to this schema, and I store that inside Data Factory, they're going to be disappointed because everything is metadata driven. Everything is parameters and just go and scrape all these tables in a giant list. And luckily, because it does use, well, not luckily, they designed it well. Because they use the operations logs, they actually pull that out of what actually ran in each child object. So if I've done this, I've tagged my Data Factory. If I go back, if I find something, I think customer is one of the ones that I went and did it with. Go and have a look at lineage. You can see I've got the lineage that actually happened from this one customer table. This is your SQL database. There were two different Data Factory jobs in my data wrangler that sucked that data out, and it went to two different places. So we've got one going to a place in the lake, another one going to a different place in the lake. So that just as a, where do I use this downstream? And again, I could set up future hops I haven't in this example, but that is a great first step for lineage. Now in Data Factory, it does it quite well because it actually goes down to the column level. So I can say, well, actually, who did I give the first name and last name to? And I can actually see it kind of grays out the one it didn't go to. I can see those columns went through one path to one data set, they didn't go to another path. So I'm trying to say this data set had some sensitive data in there. Where did that flow in my lineage? If I've got that tracked all the way through, I can actually go and find it and I can go and explore it. And that is incredibly valuable. And again, I did nothing for that. I just hooked up Data Factory and said, just watch it, just keep an eye on it. And just to prove that out, I'm going to switch to Data Factory. Going to open up that particular pipeline, if it's still there. Don't think I've deleted it. And you can see this is a super generic one. So it's super little basic example one. Wait. So that's saying I want to take from a parameter which table I'm going to select from, and a parameter of where I'm going to put it to a lake. And I had this as a get a list of tables, run this child object for each thing in that list. So there's nothing in that particular Data Factory activity that ties it to my customer table or my customer CSV. That is all derived at runtime. It's all generic, all dynamically metadata driven. So the fact that it grabs the lineage, it understands that it was that dynamic pipeline that caused that table to go to that file. Awesome. Love it. Super, super useful. Now that does fall down a little when we're talking about things that aren't as straightforward as a Data Factory copy activity. So lineage doesn't yet do things like from a SQL view or via a stored proc. I think they mention on the documentation SSIS if it's hosted in an ADF. I've not looked at that because I don't want to build an SSIS package. Data flows. So if you're doing data factory mapping data flows to move data, again, it's got a lot of the logs. It can do that scraping. If you're using Databricks, if you're using Synapse, Spark, a lot of that stuff doesn't contribute lineage yet. So there are some holes in terms of what can create that lineage object, but actually the fact that it's there, the fact that the structures are there, and as we'll come on to, the fact the API is in there for us to do that manually, so much potential. Loads of good stuff in there. I do actually love the lineage tracking bit. It is very, very good. Okay, onwards. So I want to talk a little bit about asset insights. Honestly, I think it's the least exciting part of it. But then it's because I'm very much on the techie engineering side of things. For the people who are more on the overall data governance, the oversight, the tracking sensitive data, this is incredibly important. So we can do things like this. So automatically, based on all the things that have been tagged and registered in Purview, we've got a load of out-of-the-box dashboards. Essentially just a ton of Power BI built into Purview. So I can go and say, what kind of sensitive data do I have? What kind of files are giving the most kind of alerts? Where do I store most of my data? You know, you can do all of that kind of analysis of your data estate to have that real bird's eye view of everything that's going on inside there to then go and explore it. So there's loads and loads of stuff we can do to kind of dig into the depths of what's been registered inside our Purview account. So we'll step into what is going on. Don't even know why I bother putting a slide together for that, but here's what it is. So we've got insights in here. So you might have people who they don't have access to be registering sources and managing credentials and managing scans, but they have access to come here and just see the report, see the overview, get the kind of the KPIs of how well am I managing my data estate. So we can see, general, what have I registered, what kind of things have I done, what kind of resource sets have I got. You can see when are my scans running, how often am I scanning data, not very often in my kind. What's in my glossary, classifications is one of the most useful for me. So how many things were tagged as personal? How many data sets did I have something that was government data in there? And then we can start kind of filtering it down and exploring it and getting to the bottom of what was that data? Why have I got someone's email address in there? And we can dig in, explore it, say what was that? Why was there an email address? Okay, I can now start to understand where that's being used. So that kind of digging down of going, if someone goes, right, GDPR audit, where are you exposing sensitive data? Being able to go, we're exploring it in these places only, we register it, we scan it. It's a lot of the due diligence of how well are you looking after your data. This is explainability of your management processes. Digging into your sensitivity, which I've not done any of, so that's not going to be good. You can dig into and say, of all the classifications, how many have I classified, of my documents have I classified as highly confidential, top secret? How many are public knowledge? And you can just manage all of that through these high-level reports. So very, very useful for understanding the lay of the land when you're looking at your overall data estate. So seems a little bit kind of just as an obvious, and you can do some reporting what's in there. But actually, for the kind of people we're talking in that giant personas chart, incredibly useful to actually understand who's going to be using it. So in terms of these people, the people in our list, how well do we actually do all this stuff? And it's mostly okay. So information security, actually very good. One of the biggest focuses, I think, in terms of the development behind Purview has been keeping those people happy. Trying to say, where is sensitive data? How many times am I keeping it? What access policies do I have around it? Has been a massive focus of a lot of this, and it's actually quite good. So much of it is built for scanning, finding, registering, and tagging sensitive data that that's actually quite well coded. There's a lot for the InfoSec persona. Data owners, again, it's pretty good. They can find what data's in there. They can find what's registered. It's a little bit techy for a lot of data owners, but they can get a lot of the information they need there. In terms of managing a data dictionary, it's actually very good. You can do a huge amount, keep a vast amount of data inside that catalog. Data stewards doesn't really do that much. So understanding what data flows into another one, great. Doesn't really have anything to do with data quality. There's no place to do some data profiling and understand what's of this particular field. This is how many unique values, this is the range, this is the kind of the general contents of it. And you could argue it's not really for that, but it's something that a lot of people, if you talk to data stewards about data governance, it's the things they will mention. So data stewards kind of covers, doesn't do everything they'd like. They'll be like, okay, helps me a bit. Data engineering, yeah, there's some stuff we can do. We can do a lot of metadata calling. We can ping the API and get some info out. I've got one or two API examples I can quickly show you. I've made a video that's far better on that, so I'll poke that link in a sec. And data consumers, yeah, it's got loads of places to get the documentation, loads of places they can get all the information they need, but it's possibly a little bit heavy-handed, it's possibly a little bit too technical for the majority of data consumers. Again, hoping that's going to improve as it gets through maturity. So much of this is getting the foundation of that massive sprawling data map in place. And so much of the focus that we've seen is about increasing the number of data sources that we can scan. So trying to make sure this thing can get everything inside it. So we can just actually be aware of everything that's out there before they focus on the, how do we make it really easy for Power Platform to see what's in there? How do we make it link better into other services? But one of the things I've actually not covered, that's before we finish up and go on some questions and other bits, I've got some other bits to show you. So we mentioned Synapse at the start of it. So Synapse is this general analytics workspace. It's the new Azure Analytics bit for doing either big, heavy, big data style MPP, that's massively parallel processing, data warehousing. Essentially big, chunky, cluster-driven SQL server, like 60 SQL servers tied together and working in unison. Or doing serverless SQL. So being able to write a SQL query and having it go and query a lake in real time and bring data back on the fly, which is kind of crazy cool. Or being able to write Spark, but within a Microsoft ecosystem, within this whole same workspace. That's kind of this Synapse thing. And one of the hard bits is that having a data catalog, having this big, rich data document discovery thing isn't really that useful if you can't use it, if you have to kind of go and search for something, go, great, that's really useful, and then copy and paste a connection string and paste it somewhere else, and you don't have access, and it's all really awkward. That's no good. What we do have is if I go into Synapse, and zoom in a little, if I want to go and build a thing, I've got the search bar at the top. Now the search bar, I've got a choice. Do I want it Purview backed or Workspace backed? That's because I've associated my Synapse account with Purview. So if I go into Manage, I've got Purview here, and I can just do that. That should be an add button. Oh, I can't because it's already connected. Fine. But you can associate a Purview account. There we go. I've got Advancing Catalog associated. And that means when I'm working, when I'm in my workspace, I can go, actually, yeah, where was customers? It'll go off. This is a search of Purview. So this is actually just the Purview data dictionary. I can go, what was I trying to do? Oh yeah, customers, my lake folder for customers, or that CSV for customers. It'll bring back all of the Purview information. And then I can say, well, actually, I want to do a new Spark notebook, load it to a data frame. There we go, it works. And it goes and writes the Spark I need to connect to that, to load it into a data frame, to start writing a Spark job on it. I can do the same writing it in serverless SQL. I can do the same plugging into other bits. So that was like a massive, massive leap forward in terms of the usability of Purview, baking it into Synapse. If you're using Synapse serverless to query your lake, and you can just go, well, what's in my lake, find a bit, and then just write a SQL script that's going to run in my serverless thing. Great. There you go, to build the open row set for me. It's got the right parameters in there. It's told it to CSV and how to understand it. And I can just run that and go and understand the code. It's going to work? No, because I've already got it open somewhere. Well, that's because I'm using a bit of sample data I hadn't pre-prepared. But that integration is a huge, huge beast. So that kind of usability, the making it available to Synapse is actually really, really good. And I'm hoping to see more and more of that appearing in Power BI and other places. Anywhere you're doing any kind of data analysis, data exploration, data development, I kind of want to see that little Purview search bar so I can then just start using the catalog without stepping out of my development environment to go and look inside my data dictionary and pull stuff back in. The more we can do of this, the better. Okay, Data Factory, you can do this now. So I think if I've got my Data Factory knocking around, one of them, we can go and see if this one's hooked up. But again, that search bar of when you're in development, there you go, this is now Purview, so we can do that. Go and have a look, what's in orders? Again, this is in Data Factory, but it looks exactly the same. And I can say, do I want to have a new data set? Do I want a new linked service to the lake that this is in and actually give me the linked server stuff. Already building it and building in the search stuff. So super, super useful to hook into this stuff. The final thing I want to show you guys, because I know people were asking questions about Atlas and whatnot, is there is this. So there's the PyApache Atlas is one of the libraries that's out there, which is a pre-existing thing for working with Atlas from PySpark or Python, general, other places. And because Atlas has been around for so long, there's like lots of these different libraries that are around for using it. This does seem to be one of the ones people are kind of settled on. So I can do things like I can do a search. I've got a hard-coded entity here, but that's going off saying query my Purview account and bring back all the details to do with a particular entity. So it's going off and it's finding a particular thing. I've forgotten what this one's called. This is my scan. I don't know where the name is. Somewhere in there. So I'm basically pulling together a couple of different entities. And then way down here, I can do this kind of thing. I can say, whoops, I want to have new lineage. So that lineage that it was automatically doing from Data Factory to say, this entity ran to Data Factory to create this data entity, I can write some code inside any other code that I've got. So whether I'm using Azure Functions, whether I'm using Databricks, whether I'm using Spark in, I don't know, Kubernetes, on-prem, wherever it happens to be, I can call an API via a library, via various different libraries, and just say, hey, reg this custom entity. I can create custom asset types. So if I'm using something that doesn't exist inside Purview, and I want Purview to actually recognize this as a new thing, I can do that. Again, because it's all open source Atlas stuff, you can use the Atlas API is fairly well exposed. So we're going to have a look. Do I have it in my list of recent accessed stuff? I've got one called notebook processing. So that's the one that's created for me. This is a new object called notebook processing, and it ties this entity with this entity. So you can see when I'm inside Purview, I've got this whole idea. I've got this thing called notebook processing. It's an entity that I can then go and add more details to. And if I look at lineage, I can see this custom process. We used to take it from one existing entity to another existing entity. And I can then start to flesh that out and add more details and actually sort of extend it. And that is massive in terms of the lack of extensibility that they had in the original Azure data catalog. The fact that we can essentially, if there isn't already an data source for whatever you're trying to scan, if there isn't an existing set of scanning rules for it, we can just build it into any code, any software we are writing that we want to integrate into Purview, we can just map it and we can create those things as we go. So yeah, it's kind of cool. But again, there is a video that goes into much better detail, and yeah. There's a link to YouTube. I do lots of things looking at Databricks, Synapse, Purview, and I've done a lot of videos recently around Purview, how you do that lineage, how that all works, how it all fits together. So if you want more details on that, I'd say just go check out a video rather than get me to try and do it live. And yeah, do we have any questions knocking around? Power BI integration, as one of the questions, is Power BI integration on two ways. Power BI integration for lineage does work. Again, there's a video, YouTube, probably check that out. I can't show you in this one because the Purview account has to be in the same tenant as your Power BI account. So for this version of Purview, I don't have them hooked up together. And the other version I made for a YouTube video, I've now deleted because it was costing me more money. But they've now changed that, so it's not much cheaper while it's in preview. Be aware, it is quite cheap. I mean, it's quite cheap for the next few months, I think until June. While they're in this preview mode, while people are kicking the tires, checking it out, that kind of stuff. In terms of overall data costs, people have looked at it and said, it's a little expensive. So you've got a choice when you're creating Purview. So if we go back and we go on a new Purview and create a new one, you have this choice. If I just pick any old thing, that'll do. Oops. In configuration, you've got this choice. So how are you going to size your platform? How many capacity units do you want? Capacity units, essentially a little bank of servers. Do you want 4 cores, 4 nodes? Do you want 16? And there's a cost associated with that in terms of having.
Can you switch the scenes, please, Simon?
Oh,
we're
yeah.
seeing the final slide.
That would help. So yeah, when you're creating your Purview account, apologies. Under config, you'll get this choice of platform size, and that's the only option you have currently. So you don't really have much of a slider, you don't have a lot of granularity, you don't have much detail you can go into. Currently got the choice of 4 capacity units, which they say is kind of a dev size, or 16, which is a fairly big chunky one. Now, it's hard because they're kind of a lot of the costs. If you look at an enterprise size data governance tool, they cost a hell of a lot of money. They're very, very expensive tools. So actually compared to that, it's fairly cheap. But if you don't need a full data governance tool permanently turned on, currently the way the pricing is advertised looks fairly expensive. Now, I don't know what the price is going to actually be by the time it goes GA. I don't know when it's going to go GA. So it's certainly worth looking at. But now is a really good time in the next couple of months, depending on your subscription type. If you go on the pricing page, it has the big list of this is where the discounts currently are. But it's currently quite cheap to try it out, check it out, see if it works for you, see if it actually gives you value. And then we'll see what the pricing is when they come out of it for preview. Any other questions? There's lots in the chat. So one of the things of what did you do to get Purview? It wouldn't let me register it or test it. That was one of the things I mentioned in the earlier slides. See if I can go back up. It is fully accessible. It's not a private preview. But when you are first spinning it up, you need these things. So under your subscription, you need to have enabled a set of resource providers. So can I get that up to show you? So on the subscriptions, under my subscription, I have these things called resource providers. And now essentially you need to have access to be able to do it. So if you're not an admin of your subscription, you'll need to ask Gordon to set it up for you. But you need to ensure that you've got Purview and Event Grid and storage all enabled. And storage is one of those that kind of enabled by default. But essentially, if you don't have either of those, if you don't have Purview turned on, you don't have Event Grid turned on, then you will have trouble. Essentially, it'll come up with a horrible, gnarly error message, and it'll make it seem like you've been not allowed to install Purview. It is just those things. So if you register those those resource providers on your subscription, you should then be able to create Purview without problem. Any other questions?
Yep. So can it load data from SQL extended properties, MS description, for instance?
I have no idea.
Okay. How would you? Well, we can probably get Robert to follow up with you for that. But any idea? A new question. Any idea on how it compares to other data governance tools? Where would you position this towards the competition?
Honestly, I can't really say. So I've not worked really closely with your Calibras and Informaticas and your big expensive ones because they tend to be fairly expensive. So I've not put it through its paces, checking it against the others. If I was going to guess, I'd say it's probably fairly behind on the maturity curve because it is new. It's in preview. It's taken a big leap by being based on part of Apache Atlas. Because what we've seen tons of people adopting Atlas out in the real world. But then if you're adopting a fully open source one, you expect it to have some rough edges. You expect to have some things that aren't that super business friendly. It's not going to be your low code, super nice kind of go and does everything for you, but it's free. And it's building upon that baseline. So I'd say, yeah, if you're used to using a full enterprise level one, it'll probably feel a little rough around the edges. It'll probably feel like there's some niceties that aren't in there yet, but it should be a lot cheaper. And again, it's just starting, it's just growing. So yeah, we'll see. I'm kind of keep an eye and see where it goes over the next year or two.
All right. Does it support XMI export, the XMI export format to feed the information, the data catalog information into other more business-facing catalogs?
Don't know.
All right.
Never tried. Currently, the only thing that I've had to play with in terms of the export, the only exports I've had to play with are purely through the API. So I can just give you the data in JSON, then you can do what you want with it. I've not seen any other kind of default en masse exports or integration exports from it. So in terms of how you'd plug it into other things, Power Platform, all that kind of stuff, don't know.
All right.
Yes.
So one more question. Well, actually two more. How would you compare it to Azure Data Explorer and Custo for JSON data? Does it crawl and discover the schema of the JSON files that we have it, well, that we register for it?
Ooh, how well does it handle JSON as a thing? That's a good question. Do I have any JSON that's actually being scraped as part of my legs? Honestly, I've gone slightly easy on it. I've not tried to get it to do anything really, really gnarly because I'm like, just try and do the basics.
It's preview, so yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, I don't have any JSON detailed structures actually registered. It'll be interesting to have a look. So certainly Atlas can. So the Atlas Asset Explorer can actually understand elements of JSON, understands structured and semi-structured data. I've not had a look to see how fleshed out they've made that in terms of their implementation. So everyone, I'll make a note, I'll follow up on that and have a bit of a look and see if we throw something things that are really gnarly at it, how it handles it. I've also not really put it through its paces for evolving that kind of thing. Because when you're dealing with JSON, a lot of this stuff is kind of expecting it to be a fairly fixed structure. Whereas if you've got something like JSON and there is a nested struct in there and that just adds in some extra attributes each time, does it realize it's evolving? Does each scan actually grow on it nicely? How well does it deal with that stuff? It's fine if it's a flat structured file, but I'm not sure how it'll handle the nested stuff. So I'll have a dig.
All right. Final question, unless someone pops up a new one, is how would you compare it cost-wise to just running your own Apache Atlas instance? Well, negating the obvious downsides like maintenance and the Purview, well, extra thingies that they put in place, but how would you compare it?
I mean, so currently it's going to be a little cheaper because they're discounting everything. When it goes live, yeah, I'll imagine it's going to be more expensive. You know, the same way as running Databricks is more expensive than hosting your own Spark cluster, because all of this stuff, they're charging you for a managed service. You're paying for not just the raw compute costs, but the licensing and the extra bits and the special sauce on top. So it's going to be more expensive than managing your own Atlas cluster yourself. But hopefully it should be a lot less work. There should be a lot less config, a lot less management and maintenance of it. And it should have a lot more features. That's kind of where they're going at it. If in your company you have all the knowledge and background to actually spin up Apache Atlas, and you're not going to use a lot of the scanning stuff, there might not be that much value in spinning up Purview. It's going to cost more. But I guess they're going for a lot of people who aren't from that background and kind of taking a lot of those features and making it more available. So it kind of depends on the maintenance, management, and overhead and kind of where you think you are.
All right. So I think, Simon, that's all the questions we have for you.
Cool. Lots of awkward questions around things I've not looked at.
Well, that just means that you've got input for new videos. So
that's true. I do need to do more videos, but I've not done one for a week and a half.
Oh.
Cool. Well, on that note, thanks everyone for coming along.